Some people say my family is here for fun. That is not why we are here. We are here for one reason: physical safety. We left Afghanistan because we were afraid for our lives. Months ago in Athens, my friend Hamid shared why he and his family chose to be refugees. Hamid did not want to radicalize in his refugee enclave. In fact, this is the very thing he fled from. He currently attends English classes and wants to properly integrate into the professional world. He wants to become a doctor. In my previous speech, I analyzed the key arguments in the controversy over how many Middle Eastern refugees the U.S. should admit. I spoke on the different sides of the debate over whether or not the number of refugees currently permitted entrance into the U.S. by the Trump administration should be increased. I believe that the burden of the refugee crisis must be lightened. The Trump administration should increase the amount of refugees permitted entrance into the U.S., provided that the administration strengthen the USRAP, also known as the United States Refugee Admission Program. I believe that this policy change would be an effective attempt at lightening the problem of the refugee crisis. Two items lie at the heart of the issue. The first is the conception of moral burden. The U.S. possess a moral obligation to relieve host countries of their economic and social hardships by admitting more refugees? If the answer to this question is yes, to what extent should the U.S. exercise that burden? The second item at the heart of the issue is the concept of national security. As evidenced by the crises and plights of other countries, increased refugee admission could lead to increased physical safety of Americans. Questions that emerge from national security considerations are, first, whether or not adjustments can be made to the current system for protection, and two, while keeping national security considerations in mind, what number is reasonable for refugees? Perhaps from these two items at this issue's heart emerges one overarching question. Is exercising the United States moral burden more important than ensuring that the U.S. citizens are as protected as possible from the threats of terrorism? The whole issue of increasing the refugee entrance quota rests on this fundamental question. In order to break this deadlock, I am proposing the policy solution purported by the Heritage Foundation to strengthen the USRAP. First, a comprehensive assimilation strategy must be bolstered. Second, the best candidates for resettlement must be prioritized. Third, the training and experience of refugee officials must be increased. And fourth, the vetting system must be updated. USRAP currently asserts American leadership, helps partners and allies in a tangible way, and rescues some of the world's most vulnerable people. If my solution suggestions are implemented, the government can strengthen the USRAP in ways that will lessen the security challenges and improve the economic, fiscal, and assimilation outcomes for refugees. In short, it will provide an answer to our original question. I am not advocating the USRAP's strengthening of the only available for the refugee quota issue. Other options include lowering the quota. However, ultimately, I think the solution best mediates between the issues of moral burden and national security. The refugee crisis is prevalent in the U.S., as foreign policy discussions revolve around this issue. Therefore, today's discussion is extremely relevant to current events. The decision over whether or not to increase the amount of refugees allowed entrance into the U.S. is an urgent one. Currently, countries are eager to relieve themselves of the increasing economic and social toll created by the refugees. About 60% of the world's refugee population lives in about 10 countries. More than 3/4 of the refugees in the urban areas of Jordan and Lebanon are unable to meet their basic food, shelter, health, and education needs. For these hard-pressed countries, the process of processing, integrating, and finding jobs for the refugees has become increasingly challenging by the millions of refugees entering their borders. As a result, international organizations like the UN High Commissioner for Refugees are looking for more third countries for resettlement. The evidence I am going to share with you will demonstrate that the United States will be even a more viable third country option if the USRAP is strengthened. Now I will move on to the various types of and reasons for USRAP's strengthening. Bolstering a comprehensive assimilation program will minimize homegrown radicalism. Tellingly, terrorism is an increasing problem in Europe. When refugees do not integrate economically and socially, radicalization is given a secluded environment to prosper. Predictably, in Europe, refugees are remaining in their camps, living in excluded communities on their own. Stakeholders interacting with the refugees should be responsible for the implementation of assimilation. Occurring both during and after the resettlement process, assimilation can take many forms. Primarily, it will involve the public school system, civil society organizations, and VOLAGs, emphasizing civic education and shared public American history. VOLAGs are volunteer agencies, including the 9 U.S. private agencies and 1 state agency that has cooperative agreements with the State Department to provide reception and placement services for refugees. The Office of Refugee Resettlement would also implement a strategy including measurable benchmarks of success, such as English language acquisition, and a requirement of regular progress reports from the previously mentioned agencies. Civil society itself could also enhance refugee assimilation. Places of worship, community groups, and academic communities can marshal additional resources for refugees and facilitate their entry into mainstream society. The U.S. government should amend existing refugee law to promote private resettlement programs. This avenue has proven successful for Canada, where refugees have had better assimilation outcomes and report greater satisfaction with their new lives. After amending the law, the U.S. government would count the privately funded refugees under the yearly admission ceiling. This would free up the administration to raise the official refugee quota without raising fiscal expenditures. These assimilation efforts will decrease radicalization for many reasons. First, the attention of refugee children will be directed toward productive civic efforts rather than extremist ideology. Second, the civic education will develop a sense of civic pride and patriotic attachment to other Americans, rather than resentment towards the West and hostility toward U.S. citizens. Third, economic assimilation will keep refugees from being attracted to terrorist engagement for poverty reasons. Fourth, societal assimilation will build social capital critical for remaining in mainstream culture, rather than retreating to secluded enclaves. Fifth, private resettlement programs will accelerate the assimilation process, mirroring the success of Canada. The second avenue for strengthening USRAP is prioritizing the best candidates for resettlement. These strategies will allow both a fulfillment of the U.S.'s moral burden and a calming of national security concerns. The first candidates of focus would be those in the frontline states. This behavior will reveal the U.S.'s heart for those who are especially vulnerable, suffering, and in imminent danger. It will also demonstrate the U.S.'s commitment to responsible use of its finite resources, stretching them as far as possible. The second class of candidates of focus would be the highly educated and highly skilled. Historically, when the advancement of the higher tiers of a society is squashed by external constraints, resentment breeds. Given the opportunity, this often finds expression in resistance movements. In the case of Muslim refugees, the resistance has been ideological radicalization and subsequent terrorist activity. Removing artificial barriers for already educated and skilled refugees will decrease the odds of backlash. It will also quickly bring productive workers into the U.S. labor force and enhance the prospects for assimilation. Additionally, it will provide less skilled members of refugee society an example to strive after. And finally, economic success will again decrease the attraction of radicalism for monetary gain. The third class of candidates of focus would be those qualified. Quote, qualifications would include a planned commitment on behalf of refugees to adhere to the laws and the Constitution of the United States, a provision of specialized examples of what laws and rights all residents and citizens of the U.S. must respect. That provision is the second criteria for qualifications. In addition to merely meeting criteria upon admittance, these expectations would be laid out as violations of which justification for arrest and deportation would be warranted. Therefore, right off of the bat, because of the resettlement qualifications criteria, refugees would be informed of the stakes of their behavior. This could serve as a deterrence for committing crimes like acts of terrorism that would result in deportation. Ultimately, this focusing action could have the positive effect of motivating refugees to embrace and respect the fundamental rights and values of the U.S. The third avenue for strengthening USRAP is increasing the training and experience of refugee officials. Several types of improvement will be undertaken. First, requiring regions of focus for officials. This would create a continuity and depth of knowledge regarding that region's conflicts, histories, and languages. Officials would then be able to deal with refugees from that region in a more relevant way, aware of any impending threats culminating in that region that could spill over into the U.S. via refugee entrance. Secondly, officers with relevant language skills would also be rewarded, providing incentivization. This would allow accurate translations of applications and also informative conversations with the applicants that would allow officers to better assess applicants' credibility. Requiring the United States Citizenship and Immigration Service to conduct regular comprehensive fraud assessments would also be an important improvement. USCIS has not released any large-scale fraud assessment reports since 2009. Lastly, the government could also use DNA spot checks to detect and deter fraud. These advancements would cut down on instances of fraud committed within the system. Fraud is a known problem within the U.S. immigration system and has the potentiality to allow through undetected risks that could materialize into security threats. The fourth avenue for strengthening the U.S. RAP is updating the vetting system. Currently, the U.S. security, vetting, and case management systems are outdated. USCIS's immigration benefit system is primarily paper-based. The next vetting and case management system should be electronic and person-centric. It should allow the user to retrieve quickly all the records available on a given person. The Department of Homeland Security is already investigating the use of person-centric systems. The government must continue on this track. The vetting system will decrease the initial national security threat of incoming refugees by allowing all refugee profiles to be efficiently stored and easily accessed. At first glance, it will be more obvious whether or not a refugee candidate poses an actual security risk. Furthermore, as refugees operate within the U.S., their official activity could be easily and efficiently recorded by the system, allowing for continual tracking, flagging of suspicious behavior, and ultimate safeguarding of the public safety. Since fine-tuned vetting would alleviate national security concerns, it would also allow the U.S. government to raise revenue quotas with confidence. A counter-argument could be made concerning the agency of the implementation of this proposed policy. On September 26, 2017, President Trump lowered the refugee quota for fiscal year 2018 to 40,000. A counter-argument could be made, beginning that federal law gives the authority to fix a number of refugees to the U.S. to the president, but only after appropriate consultation. This consultation is with the legislative branch. President Trump overstepped his legal boundaries by unilaterally setting the refugee quota. In the future, Congress should reassert its role in the refugee policymaking. If large changes in refugee admissions are to be made, the American people's representatives in Congress should assent to such a change. This is the counter-argument. In refutation is the argument that the process for determining how many refugees may enter the United States through U.S. RAP remains entirely in the hands of the executive branch. Yes, federal law gives the authority to fix a number of refugees to the U.S. to the president after appropriate consultation, but this appropriate consultation is defined as having various administration officials talk to members of the Senate and House Judiciary Committees. It is more a formality than a firm requirement that the president listen to congressional advice. Furthermore, both previous presidencies have set precedent for how this relationship ought to play out. Since neither of the administrations violated the law, the president ought to be, at the very least, respected, if not followed. In closing, I return to the question with which I began. Is exercising the U.S.'s moral freedom more important than ensuring that U.S. citizens are as protected as possible from the threats of terrorism? Going off of the evidence, it seems as though we have to sacrifice neither. Strengthening the U.S. RAP can accomplish both. This policy suggestion ensures that the program continues to serve U.S. interests, support our allies, and help those in greatest need. Ultimately, if he and his family were under the strengthened U.S. RAP policy, Hamid would have a fighting chance at assimilation. Thank you.